Hey all, and welcome back to another build guide. My name's Luke, and in this tutorial I'll be making this great looking incinerator. I'll show you how you can easily add lighting effects and real smoke to tie this whole scene together. So let's jump right in and get started. There are a few separate steps we need to take in order to bring this scene together. First, we'll need to make a device to hold the smoke generator. Second, we'll need to plan and install the smoke generator into the scene, including the LED. Third is actually building the incinerator, and lastly, we need to install the incinerator and blend it into the scene. So let's start with building the smoke generator device. In order to make the smoke generator work, we need to build a small canister for it to sit in. The base of the generator sits in the bottom of the canister and draws the oil up into the heating element of the generator. To make the oil canister, I'm using an old lid from a hairspray bottle. The two wires from the generator will poke through the base of the hairspray lid and get sealed with glue to prevent oil from leaking out. To help the glue get a good hold on the plastic lid, I lightly roughen up the surface. The glue I'm using is a 2-part epoxy that won't decay when in contact with the oil. Just be sure not to press the bottom of the generator hard against the base of the lid when gluing. There needs to be a small gap so the oil can be drawn up into the generator itself. I'll leave mine to dry upside down, which helps it center itself as it dries. The pipe that directs the smoke is made from an aluminium tube. There's no specific diameter required, just as long as the smoke generator can comfortably fit inside without touching the edges. However, the length of the tube will become an issue if it's too long. I've found a length of approximately 8 to 10 centimeters works well. If it's too long, the smoke cools before reaching the top and will sink back down the tube. Be sure to sand and file down the rough edges. This will help prevent small filings from falling into the small canister and blocking the very small pipes that draw oil up into the smoke generator. The aluminium tube connects to the canister by a pressure fit. To achieve this, I use fibre washers and sand them to shape. Using a Dremel tool makes this job much faster. Three washers seems to work well for me, and before I glue them I roughen up the surface of the aluminium tube so the glue gets a good strong bond. Again, I use 2-part epoxy to glue them into position. Once dry, I sand a shallow beveled edge around the washers so it can press fit into the lid which holds the smoke generator. To assist the flow of smoke and prevent a vacuum occurring inside the canister, I drill some small holes near the base of the tube, making sure the holes are below the height of the smoke generator tip when it's installed. That way the air will be drawn through the holes and the smoke will exit out the top of the aluminium tube. Now, just to make sure it all works as planned, I give the setup a quick test. Now we can move on to installing it into the layout. Here is a cross section of how it will look when installed. The side of the aluminium tube can get quite hot, so I use some silicone tape to help insulate it. Just remember to leave space at the top so the washer can slide over. Here it is with the insulation tape installed. If you're not happy with the press fit of the canister or just want some extra redundancy, you can also drill a small hole through the side of the canister and into the fibre washers. That way you can line up the holes and insert a pin or thumbtack to give you that little bit of extra security and ensure the oil canister and smoke generator don't fall off while it's being used. Once you know where you plan to have the smoke generator, mark out its location and bore a small hole to start with. I'm using this spare piece of foam for my example, but the same principle applies to any fixed layout. Trace the washer so you have a guide and don't make the hole too big. You also want the base of the hole to flare out like this, so the aluminium tube can fit along with the insulation tape wrapped around it. Then cut out a small amount of foam so the washer can sit flush with the surface. Again, I'm back with the 2-part epoxy to glue the top washer in place. That's basically the hardest part out of the way. Now you just need to apply your normal scenery technique over the top. When done, clean up the hole and test fit the aluminium tube again to ensure a nice snug fit. If you plan to add lighting effects, this will be a good time to install them as well. When you know which way your incinerator opening is going to be facing, drill a small hole just big enough for the LED. I'm using a 5mm amber flickering LED, and I solder on a 2200 ohm resistor. And here is how it will look and fit with the incinerator placed on top. Now let's make the incinerator. Because the smoke generator can get quite warm, I want to avoid placing any plastic around it. I have a plastic brick wall I want to use, and to make it heat proof, I make a copy by using the Woodland Scenics latex rubber, and just simply follow the instructions, which basically ask for 3 layers. I've decided to use hydrocal instead of plaster of Paris to make the copy because it's quite strong, and I plan on using a very thin layer. The mixture is quite thin, and to help remove the bubbles, I give the mould a shake by hitting the table a few times. Because it's so thin, it's very easy to cut, but also very easy to damage. By lightly scoring down one side several times, I can then snap that piece off quite easily. My incinerator design is basic, so I only need straight edges. I sand back and bevel all the edges at about 45 degrees. And initially glue all the pieces together with super glue. To tidy up the edges and corners, I mix up a very soupy mix of hydrocal and let it run down the inside edges to fill in all the gaps. Just be sure to pre-wet the plaster before application. Once it starts to set, I use a needle or pointy tool to press and carve the plaster as required to get the look I'm after, filling in all the holes and gaps. To make the door, I use a spare piece of the brick wall and sand it to remove any of the brick detail. Then, using a pin, I was able to carve some detail into the door, and I added a handle using a thin piece of copper wire. We're almost done. Next is painting. I first make a wash using the stone grey colour from Vallejo and coat the entire model. Then once that's dry, go back over it with a black wash to fill in some of the detail, and then I use undiluted black to paint the inside areas of the incinerator. Just like that, it looks quite good, but I want the bricks to be a little more defined. To achieve this, I use a light coloured pastel, basically dragging it over the surface, which would be similar to dry brushing. However, I then rub the surface with my fingers to further enhance the effect and blow away any excess pastel dust. Giving it a spray with dull coat is optional. If the model will be handled, then I'd recommend sealing the pastels with dull coat. Lastly, the door, which gets a coat of Tamiya Hull Red and a light dry brushing with some metallic silver. Then simply superglue the door onto the incinerator. Now we can install it onto the layout. Blend it in as usual with some scenery and seal that in place with the alcohol and scenic glue, and then you can add some effects around the base to simulate some of the charcoal that may have spilled out of the incinerator. For that, I'm just using some black pastel. To further enhance the lighting, I scrunch up some small pieces of cellophane and place them in the incinerator opening just behind the door. Because the LED is amber, I use red cellophane to give a little colour variety. To operate the smoke generator, I've set up a switch which also operates the LED for the fire effects inside the incinerator, and I've also added one of my street lights to the scene as well. For a more detailed description of how I wire the switch to operate the smoke generator and lighting effects, check out bouldercreekrailroad.com, and I'll post up all the relevant information there, as well as the parts list for making this awesome model. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Cheers and thanks for watching.